Borderlands. Now, I do want to pivot into a question that I have for you, because as I was kind of like looking over the weekend and just kind of comparing some numbers, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Dwarf Fortress, and if there's time, we'll talk a little bit about that, because like I was seeing like Dwarf Fortress was like doing some real big numbers on Steam charts, and that was exciting because I know you're a massive fan, and then generally I was looking over the Steam winter sale, and I was seeing some of the games that are on discount, and I was like, huh. Yeah, I remember when Borderlands 3 launched. Oh, and I wonder how Wonderlands is doing. I wanted to go look, and it was like fascinating, because one of the things that I've heard so many people proclaim as a strength of those games is that they're not games as a service, that you kind of play them and you kind of move on. But I want to ask you, Chris, now that they've seen the launch of Borderlands 3, the launch of Wonderlands, do you think that it's time for Gearbox and the Borderlands franchise to look to step up? I asked for myself because when I look at Destiny, and I'm currently loving the Season of the Seraph and the content and playing it, Destiny is by far doing numbers where Borderlands, like Destiny used to be compared to Borderlands too. Like it was like, hey, it's like Borderlands, but this, or a little bit of Halo. And now it's like, oh yeah, Destiny's still crushing it over Borderlands. So does Borderlands need to embrace the games as a service for whatever comes next?
You don't have to embrace Gears games as a service. I think like the Elden Ring making the impact it did over 2022 is a real sign that like if that's not your bag, that's not your bag. There's plenty of companies out there that don't have games as a service game model and do quite well.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Dwarf Fortress, and like that's a company that's bucked a lot of the opportunities. They really haven't pushed into merch. They've been developing this out of just being fan based for so long. This has been a much anticipated release for well over a decade at this point. I think there's players that have been playing for 20 years. I've been playing for 15 or 17 or something like that. And that's exciting. So you don't have to have games as a service. My question is, are there things that games as a service offers you that without it you wouldn't achieve? And so if your goal is like, I would love to see content mature and grow, and I would love to have player feedback as part of that process, and I would love to have the content change over time, and for that I'm going to have ongoing development, and for that I'm going to have money that's ongoing.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden games as a service really does a great job of that. And so something like Final Fantasy or World of Warcraft, where they want something to unfold over years, when you talk about the story of Endwalker, that doesn't happen without games as a service. You can't get there with a single buy as you go model. That is a service that made that possible. On the other side of it, it never quite feels as done as what like a God of War game can do.
Yeah.
Where they can pick something up at the start, they can carry it through to a conclusion, and it can feel complete. So I think it's just about finding the right format for the kind of experience that you want to have. And if that's something that Gearbox wants to get into, that's great. I don't think that studios should be locked into one game genre or one pay model if they don't want to be.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really a Gearbox question. Like, what do they want to do?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because they were recently acquired by Embracer Group, which that in and of itself is a giant puzzle for the gaming industry to see what rolls down the line, because they've been acquiring a lot of different IP and a lot of different companies. And I think they announced that they just teamed up with Amazon for Tomb Raider, because Embracer acquired, the Square Enix Western, division, which included Tomb Raider. So it's going to be interesting to see what that looks like going forward. But I guess my question ends up, like, when I was thinking about this topic, was in relation to the looter shooter experience and how we've seen so many try and break into that, but never able to compete against anything that Destiny is currently doing. Regardless of whether people are currently excited about Destiny or currently on burnout from Destiny, despite what Blizzard does, not Blizzard, but Bungie does, that is good and or bad. Like it's like, it ends up being like, I think I saw like Chaos Prime tweet out like the Destiny community in itself, and like within like a day you can have all of these different emotions like you're presented within the community. And it's I was like, that's absolutely feels absolutely true. And one of the things that I was always disappointed at in Anthem was that I felt like, I know people labeled it a Destiny killer, and that was foolish, but what I was hoping for is more competition within that space. And I think if anything, if there was an IP out there that had the bandwidth and had the name recognition, that had to be able to step into the arena and compete with Destiny on a games as a service model, I think that could be a franchise that could draw that in, assuming that the community and the base would actually want to support that model. Because if they have no interest in playing a service-based Borderlands, then that's just going to be another game of service that just goes and and disappears.
I mean, I think Halo Infinite was trying to put itself as a launching platform to do that. They just failed in the launching platform step.
Yeah.
So, and like Call of Duty, I think has really positioned itself to push genres. So, within the shooter space, there's plenty. Tarkov could move more that direction. Of course, we want to see our favorite do that thing, right? But that's very much like saying that your favorite athlete would be really fun to watch in a lot of these like weird boxing matches that have happened where non-qualified people step in the ring. But there is a question of like, does that athlete actually want to do that thing? And so like, does Gearbox want to do it? Just because we like the idea of the things we like about Gearbox being present in a Destiny style model, does that mean that that's what Gearbox wants to do? So like, it's still back to that original statement.
Yeah.
It seems like it'd be really fun, but like, if they don't want to do it, they shouldn't feel pressured.
Oh, and then, if they don't want to do it, then you're not going to end up having the game deliver on any metric, because then you're not going to get that extra monetization for the extra development, and the spin up cost, I think, would be astronomical. I just think it'd be interesting to see, because like I was just like, I remember like Borderlands, especially Borderlands 2 being such a pivotal game that used to be played over and over and over again. And now it's like, yeah, it turns out the model, I think, has shifted and has moved on. And companies that have come out, like, it's not just Borderlands, but even like Outriders, like we even like, they come out with like, hey, we're not games as a service. And then I see people excited about that, thinking that it's going to offer the same type of depth and gameplay over the course of time, and it never ends up doing that. And so then I see the opposite reaction of, hey,
Right.
well, oh yeah, oh, that game died. Like, no, it was meant to be finished, and you finished it. Like you completed the core offering of the game, and they didn't design it where it was going to go on in perpetuity. That is why you're back on the games that were designed with that very aspect in mind. But you brought up Halo as an interesting point. And Destiny in itself, Destiny 1, year one, fell flat on its face. It's funny because Halo Infinite could turn it around, but they've already had year one, and they haven't yet. And maybe year 1.5 or year 2, then the game as a foundation, as a platform, might be ready. And then the thing about Halo is that you and I have been playing Call of Duty. I was playing the new DMZ mode this weekend, and I was like, holy crap, this is incredible. This is absolutely incredible.
It's good.
Huh. Like, okay, Halo, you're playing
But they
such
did not
catch up.
launch. But they did not launch DMZ or their battle pass until the initial game launched, with a reasonable number of maps, a reasonable number of modes, and reasonable server stability.
Yeah.
Do I expect flawlessness in any of those categories? No. But they launched what is, in today's day and age, a complete game first. And they've continued to, a lot of things that were bugs at first have gotten fixed over these updates. A lot of things. So like the servers have only gotten more stable. They've only added more maps. They've only added more game modes. But DMZ was not part of the initial offering, and it should not have been.
Right.
And so I think that was really good. So if you are going to do it, if Gearbox is going to do it, I think the key is taking care of your base first, and then launching something and saying, in addition to.
Right.
And that doesn't necessarily mean one product.
For sure. Yeah.
I think Final Fantasy 15 got a little fragmented. So like, it can
yeah.
be a separate IP from Gearbox. But like, if they have a current Gearbox title under works, don't cannibalize that to say, now we need to pivot to games as a service.
Now, Dirtbag Dario, hope I'm not butchering your name, kind of puts this, and this is an interesting kind of pivotal talk, but says, compare the Destiny of this year one roadmap and year one of Final Fantasy 14 content. It's sad, and WoW players deserve more for how much money that they hand Blizzard. We talked about the 2023 roadmap. Do you feel that WoW players deserve more content based off the money that is given, comparative to the content we get for Final Fantasy 14, or even in Destiny specifically?
So in economic terms, I don't feel that anybody is over or underpaid between two consenting and willing parties. I feel that there is under and overvalued where they are giving that person more credit or less credit than they deserve. But from a money standpoint, if my neighbor pays his lawn guy $50 a month to come in and mow and not edge and never deal with anything else, and I hire a lawn guy at $20 who mows and edges and plants new flowers in the bed seasonally, and they agree to that and I agree to that, right? If everybody involved is consenting, able, willing adults, then it doesn't matter that I'm paying less than half the price to get what is objectively more service. So like from a money standpoint, deserve is already a word where I really struggle, because I have some friends who, like, I've worked in a variety of careers and I've been compensated at a variety of levels. And so I have had compensation in my life. I mean, I'm only in my mid 30s, and I have made more than 10 times what I will make in 2022 when all the taxes are added up. And so my income has varied wildly over the fact that I am still relatively a young man. In that, like, I can, and it's not in order. It's not like it's done anything but go up. It has to do with what do I choose to do and how is that thing compensated. And so just being aware of that. As far as Final Fantasy 14 versus World of Warcraft, quantity of content, how are you measuring that? Does quality have a matter at all, or is it just sheer, like, is 10 quests better than one well-written quest? And so quality gets really hard to gauge. And I would gauge that more by just, are players happy? If players are happy, it's good enough, and it's very pass fail. Like if you poll this 10 players and all 10 are happy, it's good. And if all 10 players are not happy, it's bad. And just move on, because it's really hard to start quantifying that objectively. From a quantitative standpoint, remember that in two major patches next year, World of Warcraft will release somewhere between a minimum of 14 raid bosses available at LFR, normal, heroic, and mythic difficulty, and a theoretical maximum of 30. Over that same amount of time in Final Fantasy 14, if you just pick your 12 months, you are never going to have more than 2 raid tiers. And that is 8 bosses available at exclusively normal and savage, and up to, let's assume that you skew it the other way, 2 alliance raids, which have like 7 encounters or whatever, 5 encounters, and they're only available at normal. And then maybe in there you get 1, possibly 2 ultimates, depending on where maybe you can sample a specific year, but like now we're picking and choosing as opposed to they set theirs by the calendar. And so you're getting 1 ultimate fight, which is 1 multi-phase fight. So from a raid encounter standpoint, World of Warcraft, if that's your goal, is raid encounters, you get way more. They have 8 dungeons available for Mythic Plus, so they've proven with recent seasons that they can add some variety to that, which has been a long desired thing, as opposed to Final Fantasy 14 has released 1 Criterion dungeon in its history. And so from a dungeon standpoint, World of Warcraft kicking Final Fantasy's butt. From a story standpoint, Final Fantasy over a given year will release loads of story, 3 to 5 hours of story. Some of the voice acted, some of not. Major side stories all the way through a given year. And over the history that is World of Warcraft, that has been lacking. And this roadmap says they'd like to work on it, but there's no reason to trust them with anything they haven't earned. And so I was like, I'll believe it when I see it. And so, like, that's so what it's worth to the player as far as the quantity of what you're getting. I think both games are absolutely enormous. And if you want to play either of these games 1 hour a week for the next 52 weeks, I hope you have a great time. If you want to play either of these games 52 hours a week for its next 52 weeks, I hope you have a great time. Both have more than enough meat on the bone in legacy content to do that and ignore their current serving. Both have more than enough content in their current serving to do that, assuming you're willing to play a little of everything. Because in both games, if you're playing that much, if you're going to play in excess of 1,000 hours in the next year, you are very much looking at, you probably need to try PvP. You probably need to try raiding in dungeons. You probably need to try getting into the story. You need to try all these goofy side things they add, little holiday events, just because 1,000 hours is a long time. So if you're going to play 1,000 hours or more of an MMO in the next year, either game has more than enough meat on the bone for you. Now it just becomes a question of quality. And like I said, that's a really hard one to measure.
I think there's always going to be a level of frustration. There's always going to be a player who doesn't necessarily feel their dollar per dollar is served up in the same capacity per game. And that's just going to be natural because every game is going to have its ultimate strengths and weaknesses in that context. Like, for example, in Final Fantasy XIV, from a storied perspective, they continue to add more and more voice acting, but we know the cost of that. We know how long it takes them to do that in multiple languages going across the globe for all the voice actors and more. And so it's like, it comes down to like, okay, yeah, like we do want that, but are we willing to sacrifice a bigger, heavier delay in time? And you can see on WoW's roadmap, they're targeting 5 to 6 months right now. Now, if they can hit that consistently and go continue on, down the road with that, great, that's going to be awesome. And they can set the kind of, here's the cadence. Final Fantasy XIV originally started out with that 3-ish months. Now they're at 4-ish months in terms of their cadence. And would the player base be satisfied with them going to 6-ish months? Now, my personal critique when it comes down to rating is the name raid in Final Fantasy XIV. It's a trial. Like they used to within Binding Coils and Alexander. I view dungeons and trash and all of that a part of that, where that's something that they do in WoW. And in Final Fantasy XIV terms, they've kind of just cut out a lot of the nonsense and said, what are people here to do? And here's the big fight. And we're going to put so much more time and investment in that. Every player is going to have a different level of like, oh, that's what I want or that's what I don't want. And the time commitment ends up pretty much, I think, equaling out, right? Like, from the WoW World First Raid and the Final Fantasy World First Raid, like we're not talking about weeks over weeks over weeks, where that actually was the case in ARR. Like it went for the Binding Coils. I remember like I was talking with friends and it's like, oh, it's been 2 weeks. They're still not a clear. Like that doesn't necessarily play into that that mindset of it. In terms of the word deserve, that in and of itself is kind of where you are an adult, you have control of your money, you choose where to put it. If you're not satisfied with it, the answer is on sub. Like the answer is to go find something that you're satisfied with. Otherwise, are you just paying a bill and grumbling about it? If you're not providing feedback to that's important. And that's where also a lot of this becomes tricky in terms of providing that feedback, because are you being heard? And I don't know if players feel necessarily they're always being heard on a one-to-one level. That's why you and I have always personally been frustrated at like Q&As with Yoshi P that are open mic, because it's like, it feels like it's 90%, I'm making up a number, but I'm just talking from a feeling here, housing and glamour. And it's like, here's a real opportunity to provide feedback in the form of a question to the devs and get some really cool insight. But most of it's like, hey, can I glamour this item? Or, hey, what about housing? And you and I are always like, here's the answer. like we could answer for Yoshi P, but then he'll go spend 20 minutes in a detailed answer on that. And we're just like, oh man, that was like, oh, there could have been, a couple hundred other things that could have been asked that I think would have had more value. But to people who really want to ask that's their opportunity. So just if you guys get the chance to ask Yoshi P a question, like, collab, like get in line with, hey, we're all gonna, so that we're not all asking the same question over and over again, helps save so much time. So as far as it, like, I'm not a WoW raider, I'm not a Final Fantasy 14 raider. Like I've raided in Final Fantasy 14 a little bit, but most of my raiding experience comes from Destiny. And I know I misread the original comment. I read density as Destiny. And I was like, oh, okay, I don't understand it, but now I do. My dyslexic brain sucks, but it is what it is. My rating experience comes from Destiny, which has puzzles and trash, and it ends up being a time commitment. That's why I'm not in a raid every time, where in Final Fantasy 14, it makes it easy. You can kind of just queue up for the fight, and they can challenge you to it. So I take issue with the word deserve, because the answer, like, what's your choice? Like, to get mad? And if you're going to be mad at the content offering, it's best to take a break. And then you come back and then you end up having a lot more meat on the bone. If you feel like one game is delivering more content for your dollar, why aren't you playing that? Like, it's, it just seems like, for me as an adult, that's just like, all right, well, I'm going to shift my time over here. And that's what I did. Like, I was spending my time in 2 MMOs, and I wasn't satisfied with one of them. And then it's like, what's the point? Like, do I just get angry and stay angry at this game? Or do I say, I'm going to go put my time in this bucket because I don't have that much time. You know, it's not a matter about money. It's a matter about where do you value your time? What do you think?
I don't hold everything to a similar bar either. My wife and I went out to dinner the other night and it was $28 and I was stoked. And video games, if they don't give me an hour of joy for every dollar I give them, I'm mad, like upset. Like it bothers me for the rest of the night. So like, as far as what a game deserves, or like I gave $30 to Dwarf Fortress and would have given more. And I'm really not worried about if I ever get time with the game. I have bought games. I have a Steam pile of shame like everywhere else.
Yeah.
They don't make it to their dollar of joy. And I don't get mad about it, especially if I bought them on Steam sale. But with Final Fantasy and World of Warcraft, I expect 15 hours of joy every month. And so, you know, I think it's each player's choice what that is. Ideally, like, this is the move forward. That roadmap was a limited, easy to digest. It was a very small number of written things. But in addition to that, if you go back and read the post that came along with it, it comes with story updates, narrative arcs, cutscenes, new cosmetics, new world events, new dailies, updates to old and existing systems, balances around existing systems, seasonal things such as the Mythic Plus seasons. Like, there are all these other things that weren't on that graphic, because if the graphic, like, if the goal is to make it look like a Josh Drive Hayes Patreon screen, then it doesn't actually communicate anything except that's a lot. And that's really funny for something like Josh Drive Hayes Patreon screen. Not funny for something that's trying to be communicative of, we are going to give you real content that you can feel. That needs to be just the highlights. And so I think that graphic was very limited, but I would make the same graphic for Final Fantasy XIV. I wouldn't include MSQ. I wouldn't include one dungeon and trials. And if I did, I would include it as an overall header. New story, new trials, new raids, and then just move on. What is unique to point 3? What is unique to point 3 is the deep dungeon. It's the new crafting and gathering relics. Those things are unique to it. UI updates, those are unique to it. I actually wouldn't include the fact that we got an ultimate, because those are so rare. I wouldn't include the trial. I wouldn't include MSQ. I wouldn't include the new dungeon. I would not include those in that graphic, but the players will be receiving them. I would not include Tataru's Grand Endeavors. I would maybe include the Lopery tribal thing, but it would be quick. It would be a throwaway thing, depending on how big the slide got.
Yeah.
So as far as the content they'll receive, the other question is, how much will they receive in 2023? Because Dario's right. Over the last 3 or 4 expansions, there have been times where they haven't received very much. And if all they receive is exactly that graphic, I think people will still be upset.
Surprise and delight is a key aspect. Same thing with loot, right? Like, Bellular went into a deep talk about the how the brain interacts with loot, like guaranteed loot. Like, ends up becoming logging, right? Raid logging, you kind of get that mindset. But then there's also the aspect where the surprise and delight's great, but if it doesn't always surprise and delight, like, you can run into disappointment, because you're also talking about progression, and people want to be able to say, like, hey, I went to work today. Did I get paid? Oh yeah, you did. And then after a while, hey, here's a bonus check because you did really good on that, or something of that nature. So I like Bellular's thoughts on it. And he corrects himself, talking about, like, I didn't mean to say word deserved, which makes sense. But follows it up with this, saying that also, if you take a break from WoW and come back, basically only the latest content is relevant, and you kind of miss out on the stuff that you missed out on. And that kind of FOMO in and of itself is a massive turnoff for me personally. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to have that same. And for those who don't know, FOMO, fear of missing out. I think that there's a natural FOMO of life, right? Like, WoW has created these moments that are like known throughout history of, like, oh wow, like, that was crazy when all the dead were passing around that virus, and, you know, like, all these different things, like, you know, especially with pre-catalysm and going into that. And so, like, there's a natural sense that you're going to miss out on stuff by not playing it. And then there's going to be the natural sense that, you know, its question is like, are they artificially trying to create these moments, which is something I felt Destiny has done. And they've tried to kind of pare that back. And I'm very curious to see what the next season goes into. The Final Fantasy XIV side of the FOMO, which ultimately I kind of wish they'd redo it. I understood it at the time, because now you have cash shop items that are driven off the events. And so I'm like, that's fair. Like, if you don't do the event while you're subscribed, then you have an opportunity to go purchase that stuff if you want. But now it's like, man, there's a part of this that the story builds each and every year, and how big of a fault should it be for the player who just now discovered the game, to not be able to kind of like pick up on that, especially like we talked about at the beginning of the show, my love for the Halloween event, and imagine if like somebody was like, oh my gosh, that was cool. Like, wait, what else has been happening in this storyline? And the answer is you got to go to YouTube and watch somebody who posted it up there, if you want to experience it. And that comes into like, would that be a valuable change? Because it is, in a way, the content was made. Is it just artificially suppressed? And is that something that the game should do going forward?
I mean, today we're talking about the roadmap, right?
Yeah.
We talked about the roadmap moving forward. So the other question is like, how much are we willing to focus on the past versus the future? They're saying they're turning a new leaf, and now we are continuing to nitpick on things they've done in the past. And so imagine that you had been kind of a crappy husband lately. You'd been distracted with work. You'd been in a bad mood. You weren't feeling good. And you say, Julie, I've sat down and I've thought about this, and I've signed up to be with a trainer once a week, and I'm doing a counselor or having coffee with a friend to kind of hold me accountable, and I'm going to be better. And I've signed up to do some of the kids' sporting stuff with them. So I'm going to spend more time with the kids. I've got these 4 date nights planned with you. And here is my plan for the next 3 months of how to just get me back on the path to being a better husband, because marriages are seasonal. They are like, not every season of my marriage over the last 10 plus years has been identical. And some were just better than others. And so I would like the next season to be the best one yet. And so here's the effort I'm going to say. And if instead of saying, very cool, I have some follow-up questions to that. All of my questions are about mistakes you've made in the past. Then why the hell am I trying to get better? Like if I'm never going to be let off the hook, if every single one of those is a life sentence, the problem with life sentences is you're now never encouraged to get better. And so should something be unforgivable? Sure. But just be aware that by making it unforgivable, you are also removing the path to improvement. And so you need to be okay with that. So you need to say, these are the unforgivables. And if you do these, I don't care if there's no path to improvement. I don't want to forgive you. That's fine. But like, not doing dishes can't be one of them. That has to be something that I have room to improve at. Otherwise, why would I try? Well, then I guess I'll just never do dishes again, because now I've already committed the unforgivable. And so like the things you're saying WoW has been associated with, they've added these new dragon races, and those aren't going away. You come back, they're redoing all their old holidays. Great. They just added this monthly trading post, and they've already confirmed that if you miss one or if you're new, those items will be on loop. And so this will not be the one and only time that you have a chance to acquire something out of the Blizzard shop from the trading post for in-game time instead of money. Those will come back. And so like they're saying they're going to do these things better. And so if your plan is to say, I've got some complaints about the past, it sounds like they've heard those. So it sounds like the complaining window needs to calm down for a bit. I'm not saying we can never complain again, but I am saying right now they want to focus on the future. This conversation is about the better spouse that they're going to be for the next 12 months to us as the player. And so with that, yes, if they say, hey, I've done all those things, how else can I improve? Now we can go back and say, well, I noticed that your previous 12 months, you didn't focus on the yard work at all. And you really kind of said you'd be better about yard work. That's fine. But for now, I'd say they put up a reasonable scorecard of improvement for next year. Let's focus on that, and let's have a tiny bit of optimism, just the slightest little bit of a lot of the things that we are busy holding them accountable for from the past are actually on that roadmap. So I would say I would just try to keep that complaint to myself until that item in the roadmap has come up. So if one of the things I have a frustration with is current patch content is not something that ever lives on, well, the trading post is something that's supposed to go back and focus on old content. Okay, when's the trading post? In a few weeks. Cool. I'm going to keep that complaint to myself for a few weeks and see if that lives up to it. Because I think that that's a big deal. I think that the trading post is a marked change in the way they have treated legacy content. Mm-hmm. And so the legacy content complaint is something that I will try to keep an asterisk next to at least through patch 10.0.5. Now, if the trading post turns out to have 6 items and they're all easily acquirable from a million sources, and it's garbage to farm up the trading post currency, then I'm going to go right back to complaining about it. So, but for now, let's just let them, they're digging their own hole. So like, let them set the scorecard. Um, and if they fail to hit that, then we can hold them accountable when we have this conversation in 12 months.
Yeah. Now, my final thought on that, especially when it comes down to the development cycle, is that these things are being worked on and have been worked on and will continue to be worked on. And they happen in 6, 9, 12, like 18-month chunks and windows, right? That's why sometimes within development, it's not so easily just to pivot. And them putting out this roadmap, I think essentially, like we said at the start of the show, sets the tone. It sets kind of like, hey, we feel that we can reasonably deliver on these things. If they miss, it's a dock. But if they hit, that's great. I think essentially where you see this though is that I wouldn't look at this as content light. I would look at this as essentially like, listen, like this is what we can reasonably within our resources deliver to you, and hopefully it's good. If there's the ability to put out more content, they're not going to sit down and say, hey, yeah, we finished this thing that the players will really love, but let's delay it by like a year just so that we have something for that time frame. It doesn't necessarily work out that way. Like developers want to get the content out and have players play it, because that could fall into the surprise and delight. Now, it might feel light. It might feel, for some people, might feel overwhelming. All of us as gamers have different abilities and time commitments to play. Chris is a full-time content creator. He gets to play a handful of MMOs and he gets to put in way more time. And I think some people, it's interesting. They're like, oh, how much time do you get to play games a week, Brian? It's like, well, generally maybe 5 to 8 hours. Like that's the amount of time that I get as a part-time content creator to put into these games. And whenever like Final Fantasy 14 put out content, whenever, like, I'm not a WoW player, but when like WoW or Destiny, it's like the content offerings usually are more than I have time to commit to finish with, especially in any kind of span of time. And that's where my style of gaming ends up being, I just kind of chip away at things. Like I just kind of put a little bit of time in to the thing I want to play and I have fun and I just chip away. And a lot of people end up moving on. Like when you think about like hype trains and trending and all that the modern era of gaming is, I'm still over here kind of chipping away. And so by the time it comes back around to me, if there's ever like that trend and that cycle, it looks like I've done a lot. They're like, wow, like I get that comment, Brian, how did you get everything to 90 in this game? Or how have you maxed out all these things in this game? I don't play every game out there, and I just chip away a little bit, a little progress here and there. And eventually it adds up to a big offering. And so when it comes down to the content roadmap itself, like I feel like I represent more gamers in totality, as opposed to like Chris, who's a full-time creator, and other people who are like, that's what I do for my job. Like I get to sit down and really consume stuff and have a wider range because you have more time to do so. Hopefully that's kind of my final thought on it. Chris, you got a final thought before we wrap up today's show and you go back to WoW stuff over on Twitch?
I mean, you focused on the content creator side, but players are also like, there's a massive gap, even just in what players can achieve within their skill, within their hardware capabilities, within their time, within their budgets. Some people can't afford more than one MMO. And so like, it's not even an issue of time. And so, there's a lot of different ways to break that down. There was a recent Scripe interview posted with the lead encounter designer. And like, he talked about, like Scripe asked, like, do you think you have the right number of difficulties, right? They have they've LFR, normal, heroic, and mythic all supported for each raid. And Final Fantasy just has 2. And the lead encounter designer said the average player engages with somewhere up to 2, but not more than 2. And so why even have more than 2 if the average player can't consume 2? Because it's a different 2. And so you're usually engaging in one that's kind of on your easier half and one that's on your hard. So maybe you straddle. Maybe one just fits you perfectly. But we all play games differently. Mm-hmm. And so it is a very hard development question of how do you then make the rewards and the content offering and the time available and all of those things exactly appropriately balanced, right? Is it fair to lock cosmetics behind Ultimate? That's a really hard question. Because your first glance is everybody should be able to do everything, but somebody who's willing to put in more time and effort, getting a reward as a result of that time and effort, should not feel like, oh, the person who played for 5 minutes poorly got the same thing as me. Okay, so they're not the same route. And so like it's not one solution fits every game, or all games would be identical in this way. It's a bunch of different solutions to a complex problem. And it's about finding the game that really is the best offering for you. And ideally, the people that you like to share games with, when we talk about multiplayer games, because sharing these games with people adds something that no developer can.
Yeah, and thank you, Dario, for the great conversation and those comments, because it's always good to hear people's thoughts and have those discussions, and that's what it's about here. Now, guys, feel free to also hit that like button. It's a great way of sharing out these live shows, and we're gonna hit M broadcast and send you guys on your way. Enjoy the rest of your day, and again, we'll be back with you guys here on YouTube on Friday. But Chris will be live, and I'll be live over on Twitch. So come hang out. All right, see you guys.